Hey friends out there in YouTube land, Rob here. Today I want to talk to you about mobile live streaming or live streaming on location. This is going to be some tips and tricks, mainly focusing on internet connectivity, HDMI wireless transfer between a couple of different cameras, as well as wireless audio backup tips and tricks. You guys know how I like to talk about these things. It's more of a conversation as we go through, kind of a little story time to tell you some things I've experienced in the real world out there and help you overcome those types of things if you ever experience them yourself. Also, this video is really designed at people that may want to know and learn a lot more about live streaming and may not know where to begin directly. If you're already a professional live streamer and you've been doing this forever, you'll probably find some good tips and tricks in here, but you might already be implementing a lot of these ideas and concepts already. So if that's the case, go ahead and leave that thumbs up, leave a comment down below, share some tips that you have, and let's jump into it. I want to talk about these things in a specific way, and that is anecdotally, like what do I do, what have I experienced, and we're going to do that with this past weekend where I did 2 live streams, specifically 2 funerals, and I had 2 very different experiences. I use yolobox as my on-location live stream manager, which is something that I really enjoy, but these tips and tricks will work for any kind of devices that are working live stream on location. Now, that being said, let's jump into the first part, which is going to be just the simple setup. I want to share with you what I'm using. I've got a 1-inch camera right here. So I'm using a camcorder because I like the audio interface that I get, and it's going to be very important to making sure that I have a good live stream on location. You can also use DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. Really, lots of mirrorless cameras, specifically Panasonic, Canon, and Sony, have attachment modules that will get you professional audio controls put on top of your camera through your multi-shoe interface or some kind of interface like that. If you have something like that, then that's going to work great too, because it's being able to quickly switch your audio settings when something goes wrong. That's going to be helpful. We're going to talk about that more in the audio setting. Next thing we're going to talk about is I use my Vaxxus wireless transmitters that I have right here in order to get multiple cameras into yolobox. Yolobox has 3 HDMI inputs. I'm using the Pro, so it's got 3 inputs. It's got 1 USB input, which allows me to bring in all kinds of different devices, from Pro presenters or from overlays and things like that. And the device itself allows me to manage all of my connections and video and monitoring audio, comments on Facebook or YouTube, things like that, as they come through to the device, switch and record on the device at the same time. Secondly, when we talk about audio, I usually like to try to get an audio in from the main board wherever I am. But when I don't do that, I also have my own audio system set up. Sometimes I use the Sennheiser XSWDs, which are XLR plug-and-play kind of devices. Most of the times I'm finding that I really prefer these UHF rather than digital. These UHF transmitters by Kamika. This is the Boom XU. I've got 4 of these little microphones like this that all connect to this device right here that plugs straight into my camera in the way I have it set up. And then I tell yolobox to use my HDMI as the audio input source. I also tell it not to switch between video sources with audio follows video. Now, the other couple of things that I do is very important. I have a process with my team and I called ABR, Alpha Bravo Romeo, always be recording. Although we're live streaming, we need to be recording internal to the camera. It doesn't cost you any extra money, maybe the cost of an SD card. It really shouldn't even be something that factors into your decision. If you're on location and you're live streaming and you're not recording internal on your camera, in my opinion, you're making a very dangerous mistake, setting you up for possible negligence charges, especially in the idea of a live stream for a funeral or something like a family event or reunion, anything of any kind of importance, specifically newsworthy stuff that you might be doing. Anything with your client, if you're not recording in the camera, you're just working dangerously. And ABR is a process that has saved my butt a couple times, and it saved my butt over this weekend as well. Also, with ABR recording, we want to make sure that we are recording an audio source somewhere else that's free of the signal chain here. That way we always have a backup source. Now, you can use this many different ways. I've got lots of different recorders, but lots of times I'll just take this H1 in and I'll put it in auto level, right? And I'll put it over by a speaker that's got everything coming out wherever it is, or I might even get a main board out from the main board to record here as an in-between from my wireless that I'll get from the board to go into the camera. because this has an out as well, so I can output to my Sennheiser XSWD or whatever else I want to wirelessly transmit that audio. It's just a thing. So what I'm sharing with you is always be recording means I'm recording in camera all of whatever's happening on all of my cameras. At the same time, I'm recording externally somewhere the audio where I can get a good output, or even if it's just a mic'd speaker, that I can get good audio for the event that I'm going. Now, you're not seeing this right here, so I'll pull it back behind. One of the other cameras that I use happens to be a 1/2.5 inch sensor camera, and as you can see, we've got it hooked up with the Vaxis wireless transmitter. The reason that's important is that when you're indoors, you want to make sure you're getting really good video, and 1/2.5 or 1.5 inch sensor for me, I just don't find that they work very well indoors when zooming in. Work great outdoors. So when I'm indoors on a camera like this with a smaller sensor, it is always my B camera and shooting wider. It doesn't mean I don't zoom a little bit. 25 millimeters is pretty wide, but I'll put it in a place where it can be as wide as it can get. That way it uses its maximum aperture. Camcorders like this have a great advantage of being able to zoom like 600, 500 millimeters equivalent in full frame, but they do that by ramping the aperture or the iris. So like 2.8 to 4, in this case 1.8 to 2, or 1.8 to 2.4. And the different crop factors on these different cameras really changes just how sensitive or how grainy your low light image will be. This means that I will often also use lights when they are necessary, just in order to get whatever I need lit up properly for my clients. I use a couple of really nice tripods depending on what I'm doing so that I can move around and go handy cam if I need to. Handheld, I will use something like a gimbal if I think I'm going to need to move around. I usually put my smaller camera on a gimbal, zoom it in or zoom it out to a wide, and then be able to walk around with it. And my stationary cameras are usually stationary, and I have one that's on sticks or tripod with wheels that I can move around with it as necessary. When we talk about that setup, the final thing I've got is my headphones for audio monitoring. Maybe you can see them right here. I just plug them right in, and it's all good to go. Now, knowing how to set up all of this equipment is really the operator's job. I'm not going to go into the setup of all this. I will expect that you'll know how to set up your equipment, but I will answer a couple of questions right now as we move into the audio section. Now we've got our setup as far as the gear that we're using here, let's talk about the audio. So for me, I prefer when using yolobox, and this is very specific to being on location. When you're in studio, you can use different things like your soundboard or your audio interface, or in this case, I've got a Rodecaster Pro back there, and I can send all of my mics into that, or I can send it to my soundboard over there, depending on if I'm mixing some music. And that allows me to be able to very simply adjust my levels on that device, and I'll send that device straight into the audio in on yolobox if I'm streaming with yolobox. I'll also connect with yolobox at that point in time through Ethernet, but we'll talk about that in the internet connection in a second when I'm on location, like in studio. But when I'm out and about, I often don't have the luxury of using an onboard or an off-camera mixer, and so I'll need to use the audio connections set within my device and the signal chain for all of the subsequent devices connected. So what does that look like? For me, when I'm not pulling sound directly from a soundboard, I will be using one of my wireless microphones, of which this system is a UHF system, and in today's age where everything's Bluetooth and digital, to include those Sennheiser XSWDs we talked about before, these are digital. They use the 2.4 gigahertz system. Well, those wireless mics, when everybody gets crowded into a room, that range, that 2.4 gigahertz range, can get kind of crowded. This is a prosumer level product, so it does have some advanced features, which is like frequency hop and frequency skipping and encoding, which will help get rid of any kind of issues you might see. But I have found this to be not as reliable going on 3 years of use that I've gotten out of it. So in doing so, I've also noticed that switching to a UHF system for my audio has been very helpful indoors and outdoors. Not only does it allow me to be a little bit further away, but also using that UHF ultra high frequency radio wave set, well, it just means that I've got less clogged bandwidth that's going, because nobody else is using a UHF system. Some wireless mics that people use, like Shure, might be in the 1.9 gigahertz, 1.8. range, maybe a little bit 700 or 800. This one right here is in the 500 range, and in my area 500 is good to go, so I can use this, it's no problem. The difference between the 2.4 gigahertz digital and the UHF is that sometimes the UHF signal is reserved in different areas for police or emergency services. So when you get a UHF transmitter, you got to make sure you get one that works in your area. You will not necessarily be able to use it everywhere you go, and you could incur some fines. But what this allows me to do at a funeral, let's say, where you're going to have several different places that need to be mic'd, and you can't get an out from a soundboard, maybe because the person doesn't know how to give you one, and even though you have the experience, you don't want to mess up their soundboard. This allows me to place a lavalier on this mic, run it up the gooseneck on a microphone that someone else is using, you know, at the podium for the pastor, and then set this in a plant or somewhere out of the way, even tape it to the side of the podium, out of sight. No one will really notice it, and it will be able to send the signal to my receiver. At this point in time, I've got 4 of these. This system works with 4. So I can do this to the choir, I can do this to the pastor's podium, I can do this to a speaker's podium that they might have, and then I can mic one speaker that might be somewhere where they've got an all out, if I need to. And in those instances, I can now adjust my gain and volume on the device and have, through these different outputs, all 4 channels coming in separately. It is true that on my camcorder, I only have 2 channels, a left and right, but just with the simple mixing capability of here and choosing which main microphones get put onto which channels, I'm very simply able to adjust on the fly as I need to my levels between speakers. Generally speaking, the 2 most important speakers or speaking locations that you will have will be the pastor and the pastor's podium, and then the dedication podium. So I'll put those on like channel A for the pastor, channel C for the speaker podium, and I'll put my you know, the choir or something else on B and D, and that way when I'm adjusting both of those, I'm never adjusting 2 channels that might have the main speaking at the same time. They're on separate channels. It's a little bit of planning, but it works out very well. And because these have built-in nice microphones and up to 15 decibels of preamp gain you can put on here, I'm able to very easily dial each one in. Let's talk about something else. Always be recording means I'm also recording here, just like we said earlier. Being able to record audio on your device as well as externally is important, because if for some reason something happens to this signal, you're going to need to know what to do. While you're live streaming, everything's happening live. So if this signal goes down, you're still going to want to be able to do something and have something to provide your client after the fact. So if this signal or anything in your signal chain goes down, if you're not recording externally, just like if your live stream recording goes down, if your video camera isn't recording internally, you lose that ability to still have a deliverable product for your client. So that's why I will use something like this off camera somewhere else. And if you can use a 32-bit float point device, like I've got a Tatiscam Portacapture X8, that's a perfect time, because you can put it in 32-bit float, tell it to record, set your levels pretty casually, and then get back and have something to use if you need it, because you've got that 32-bit float and not worry about clipping. But here's something else. People often don't talk about that. This is another pro tip in the audio section. Yes, if you're recording off camera, you will still have audio to deliver to your client, but your live stream audio won't be, if it's messed up while you're live streaming, it's messed up while you're live streaming. And troubleshooting time while you're live streaming is time that your clients and viewers are watching an incomplete project or product. So what do you do? Well, here's the first thing. All of your cameras, especially camcorders, are going to have upgraded microphones on them as compared to a mirrorless camera. These microphones are pretty good. Now, they're not as good as getting the source directly mic, that's not what I'm saying, but for an audible area tone, they're fine. Now that I'm using all of my HDMI or XLR inputs for my audio on the back of the camera, I've got them running in from here, I do have a left and right stereo mic right there. So the very first troubleshooting tip you should have if your audio system goes down is to immediately switch over from your line 1 and line 2 inputs to your left and right inputs on your camera. By simply switching this buttons up like that, you have now immediately switched to the internal mics on your camera, and that is way better than having no audio for 15 minutes or however long it takes you while you're trying to troubleshoot this. Remember, your camera's internal recording will only record the audio that it's being told to record. So if you continue to record in camera with your wireless audio that's down, although you've got the backup later, it's not going to be recording any audio on the camera, or it's going to be recording unusable audio. So immediately switching over to input left and right instead of input 1 and 2 will immediately switch over to your onboard microphones. This is a lifesaver, because at that point in time, you are now at least getting the room tone, the room audio that the speakers and the people are saying, and that's better than not having any audio. Once you get your audio fixed and you verify here whether it's changing a battery, which shouldn't be an issue because that should have been done ahead of time, but whatever the audio problem is, you can very simply then go ahead and switch them back in. I switch one at a time, and then I bring the level up, move the level down on the other one, switch the other one, and then bring the level up so that it's not so abrupt. When to the audience when they're listening. When you switch over in the emergency to the left and right channels only, then yes, it will very quickly switch over and there might be a click on the stream. But once you get your audio problem figured out, that will then bringing the channels up in those ways will be very helpful and make it less noticeable that there was an issue. So speaking about audio, that also brings us to how does audio go bad? Well, I can tell you just on Friday when I was doing a live stream, I had plenty of room, line of sight from a balcony, front of house, down to my, down to this camera. And at some point in time, this transmitter on the soundboard was moved. I had a lead that allowed it to hang over the front of the balcony area so that I could have good line of sight. Someone up there grabbed the transmitter because they didn't think it was supposed to be there, because they changed shifts halfway through, and they moved my transmitter, right? And by moving my transmitter, that interrupted the line of sight. So that meant that all the audio that I was getting at this point in time from the front of house, which was the great audio mix of the entire room, was gone. I had to think fast. So I immediately did exactly like I said, switched over to my left and right inputs, and knew that I had this as a recorder that was recording, which meant I was at that point in time able to switch over to this microphone. So what did I do? I simply walked up to the speaker and I put this microphone on the speaker. I had plugged this one in. Once I noticed that I had gotten my signal back and forth, I turned this on and switched everything over, and then I was able to get, of course, a good mix. Now, the speaker was an important place to put it because it was the speaker that was outputting all of the sound from front of house, which meant that that speaker was driving everything. It had all the mics for everyone that was speaking. It had the choir mic, it had the chorus, the pianist or the organist. Everybody was mic'd, and it was all coming out of that speaker. So all I had to do was make sure that I set my levels right here and then maintain my levels on the camera after I got it. That's a pretty simple setup because setting the levels here is actually done from the base unit, which is the receiver. So we've talked about audio. Audio was first because audio is so important. You could have bad video and people would watch as long as they could hear, but if you have bad video and bad audio, or great video and no audio, no one's gonna watch. So let's switch over to video. On that very first one that I did on this weekend on Friday, I was not able to get the Wi-Fi from front of house. They just didn't give it to me. Just weren't gonna give it. It was a church policy. They wouldn't give me Wi-Fi. All right, what does that mean then? That meant that I was limited to using my internal SIM card on yolobox, as well as my phone hotspot and my iPad hotspot. As you can absolutely imagine, with over 250 people there, everyone connected to the cellular network, my live stream was low. My live stream bitrate was low. When I originally tested it through the encoding settings, when I had set my encoding settings based on my original network test, and I had chosen to set them at 2,000 kilobits and at 1080. And I started streaming and everything was fine for the first few minutes, but then I started noticing dropped frames. Well, at that point in time, you pause your live stream. It will pause the live stream, but it won't end it. And you change your encoding settings. I jumped down to 720 at 2000 and clicked play again. That didn't work. I paused it. I went to constant quality, which is a very important setting. I'll explain that in a second, down to 720 at 1000 kilobits per second at 24 frames per second, and that fixed my problem. So I was able to stream. Constant quality is really a great setting for when you're in a data-starved network, because what it will do is it actually adds basically the type of JPEG compression you would think of. I'm not going to go into it, but it only really updates and sends new updates to the server when there are changes in the scene. So that means that instead of sending the entire scene one frame at a time in digital ones and zeros, when you set it over to CQ, constant quality, it will actually just send the part that moves. So the majority of the scene that I was looking at and filming wasn't moving. The walls weren't moving, the pedestal wasn't moving. Who was moving? The pastor was moving. If I zoomed in or out, then things were changing. So it has less data to send to recreate that picture for your live stream. That's how it helps. Sometimes you can see some artifact and compression, but that's the price you pay for having that kind of really great connection. So what do we do? I mean, what would we say? I look at this and I say, I recognized the issues that I was having. I didn't expect to not be able to have Wi-Fi there. I used the tools that I had on me. Many times when people talk about live streaming, specifically with yolobox, because people equate yolobox to the entire process, when really it's just the hub. Many times people will say, I went to a live stream and it was choppy and it was jittery, and I used yolobox or I used another device and it wasn't, the image was terrible. That has nothing to do with yolobox. There's more than enough power in here to run all the inputs and all the videos and everything else. That has everything to do with your internet connection. And so that's where bonded internet solutions like the Teradek and things like that are very helpful in order to get your internet stream out there when you're on location and mobile. And that's something that I do quite a bit. In my area, I don't generally experience this kind of issue with my phone hotspots or even using my SIM card and yolobox. I simply believe that it had to do with the location where I was at, which was a very densely populated area of Virginia Beach, as well as the number of people that were there with all of the buildings that were big and everything around it. Plus, I don't know that my internet connection in the church that I was at really was very, very strong because it was an older church, and most of the times they use structures that aren't as conducive to, cellular connections. So the idea is that it wasn't yolobox's issue to correct. It wasn't like, oh, I don't know what I was doing, yolobox should be doing it. It was, oh, shoot, my internet's failing. Here are the troubleshooting steps. Don't end your stream. Pause your stream. First, before all of that, test your network. Continuously test your network using something on your phone like speedtest.net and things like that, and the network tester on yolobox. Yolobox will constantly give you your feed update right there. It'll tell you what your feed is doing, how much you're sending, how much you're receiving. It will tell you your drop frame rate. When you see that drop frame rate hitting up at 20%, you've got problems. It's time to pause your live stream, reduce your encoding rate from whatever it is down to a minimum. If you've already started streaming at 1080p, you will not be able to change to 720p. So that'll be an important thing to do when you pause your frame. You won't be able to change that, but you will be able to change the encoding settings, and you will be able to change the frame rate. Lower is better. When those things end up being it, when you can't do any more, you've done everything you can, and that's when your internal recordings will become even more important. By having the internal recordings saved, you can then get back to the house and very quickly put together an edit. These events are usually an hour to 90 minutes, something like that, for me, for what I do. And it's very simple to come home, use the internal recordings, and slap together a nice edit for them in 4K, which is better than what yolobox would have streamed because it only streams in 1080p, and then upload that to the server. Bob's your uncle. Everybody's happy. So you cannot do that if you don't have, in this instance, two things. Audio that you are recording externally in the event that your audio goes down. In this case, it was the Sennheiser that failed from line of sight because someone moved the lead where it was up in the front of house balcony. The immediate action step to that was to switch over to the internal microphones on the camera and just adjust the levels. That's simple. As well as having a backup recording that's independent of everything else that you can use. Also, at the same time, when your stream is being interrupted by audio, especially when you're live streaming, your video is also being interrupted because of all the pauses that you're doing because of the dropped frames. Well, When you've got that internal recording, obviously those two things, ABR, always be recording in camera, always be recording on an external device. When this happened to me on Friday, there were 75 or 100 people that were watching, and I knew that. So managing that experience for them at the time was very important for me. Had I done nothing more than just turned off the camera or let it be and not attempted to troubleshoot, instead of having maybe a 15-minute window where there was what I would consider not good video or audio, unacceptable, right? They would have had nothing. And then what do you think would have happened? What do you think your client would have said? Well, instead, what they got was the majority of the show, or the majority of the funeral, recorded appropriately, and then a fixed upload before anybody even said anything within 48 hours. Boom, it was all said and done. So we've talked about it there. Those are my pro tips. Have I missed anything? What do you think? Was this video helpful for you? Remember, the concept here is I'm sharing with you how I do it, so I'd love to hear if you do something different. But if you're just getting into live streaming, yolobox is a great place to start because it gives you so much power that you can take with you on location. And if you have some questions, don't forget to leave them down in the comments below. Join some forums over on the YOLOLive official Facebook forum and have a good time with them there. If you did like this video, don't forget to like it, comment, and subscribe. Of course, we ask for that all the time. You can hit it up, use those Amazon links down below, send me a cup of coffee through PayPal. I'd appreciate it. I want to thank you guys for watching and remind you I'll catch you all on the flip side. Bye for now.